Good morning, folks, and welcome to those who are viewing this as a recording of our continuing education for clergy and pastoral workers program. Our presenter today is Rev'd Dr. Lisa Barrowclough, a graduate of Queen's College, currently a chaplain high school in the US. She'll tell a bit about herself and her pathway to that ministry as it is part of her presentation here today. So welcome to you all. Those who are online, mute yourselves and unmute when you're asking questions or making comments. Those who are viewing it as a recording, if you have any questions or comments, just send them to me and I'll respond or direct them to Lisa as need be. Let's drink this up. And now, Lisa, I'm going to pass it to you when I make it into the proper presentation style. There we are. Way to go.
There we go.
There you go.
I'm going to move over here so I can push the buttons. Am I sitting in front of it? My coffee is. There we go. It really does work. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks for coming out. And really excited to be home 19 years later to do this. So I've organized this presentation under sort of the investigative headings. I like to try to think this way to put some kind of order to my thoughts, I guess, and I hope it's helpful to see them that way. That probably means if there's some burning question you have, and it starts with one of these words, it may come up a bit later. But don't worry at all about sort of jumping in and asking, either in the room or online, people I can't see. Beginning, I guess, with who on earth is the presenter. So as Rick said, I'm a 1999 graduate of Queen's College. That makes it really easy to do the math, to know how long ago it was. I was ordained a deacon and then priest in the Diocese of Edmonton, where I served for 3 years. And then I moved in 2003 to the US, first to Florida, and then to Georgia to work in Episcopal school ministry. Not a lot of opportunities for educational chaplaincy in Canada, and a lot going on down there. So that's why I moved. I'm actually in a pre-K 3-year-old through 8th grade parish day school. The other opportunity that moving to the U.S. afforded me was to pursue a Doctor of Ministry degree in educational leadership through Virginia Seminary in Alexandria. Highly recommend the programs there. Wasn't paid to say that. Finished that in 2009. So 99, 2009, one wonders what will happen in 2019. It's fast approaching, and I'm not really working on it, so who knows. Episcopal Day School in Augusta, as I said, 3-year-old through 8th grade parish day school, 400 students, about 80 faculty, so that makes my congregation 480 people and all their families. So I, as chaplain and chair of religious life, have responsibility for the pastoral care of all those folks. I coordinate service learning in the school, oversee and support another religion teacher who teaches godly play in the 3s through 3rd grade, and then intensive Bible in 6th and 7th. And I teach Old Testament in 4th grade, New Testament in 5th grade, and world religions in 8th grade. It's a legit course in 8th grade. 3 days a week, they write essays. The grade counts on the honor roll. We take it pretty seriously, so it's a lot of fun. So that's who I am. I first researched and put together this kind of presentation that I've tweaked for today for a movement called Missional Voices in the Episcopal Church. It's a movement about being the church in the world in really creative and new ways. It's a movement of clergy and lay leadership who feel like we'd better make some changes to keep going. So I was invited to be part of that last spring and to make this presentation. But it's also a topic I really care about and I feel is really worth talking about for the sake of not only our survival as a faith community, but really for our thriving. And that is to pay attention to some of these other voices that maybe aren't heard as much in discerning our mission and going forward. So I just want to take a quick minute to find out who everybody else is, because it's no fun to not know that. But we can't spend the whole time having some social time. So just to know what everyone's name is and their setting, and maybe something, I'm not so foolish as to think you're going to necessarily all learn something brand new, but maybe this is just something about your own ministry or your dreamed for ministry that you kind of want to nurture by stuff that's provided today. So, David, want to kick us off?
Yeah, no other choice.
No, you just sat there.
Yeah. David Burrows, parish priest in Mount Pearl, Newfoundland and Labrador. Responsible for 650 odd families. Always had a keen interest in ministry with children and youth, and participated in various ways. Once as a camp chaplain, worked also in the Presbyterian Church, and excited about ministry with children and youth always.
Charlene Taylor, parish priest in the city of Mount Pearl in Newfoundland. Not the same parish though, in another one, in Mount Pearl. And like David, keen interest inside and outside the church. Plus, I have a connection. That's why I'm here.
I'm Virginia Ford, retired Anglican priest in the Diocese of Central Newfoundland, now living in Buena Vista, but St. John's doctors like to keep me up to date, I guess, or picking at me. So I love to, what I do when I come in town, I make a day at the college. I'm one of the monks, and I also was Dave with Dave in my class. We come together, Charlene and Lisa were a year ahead. So it was like a gathering of the recent alumni. I'm really glad to see you, Lisa. It's been like 20 years.
Almost.
Glad to be here.
I'm Tom Moulton. I'm glad to be here with you this morning, Lisa. Lisa did her internship with me when I was rector St. Mark's. And we have a great relationship ever since.
Indeed.
Nice to be here.
I'm Barbara Boone. I'm deacon in the parish with Charlene in Pearl. And working with children is something I've done all my life, professionally and volunteering. Always open to new ways that we can reach to youth. Changes in technology and separation and all that. So I'm always interested in learning new ways.
My name is Earl Smith. I'm a Roman Catholic priest, not far from here in St. Pius X. My primary focus is on spiritual renewal through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. I'm here principally because of my attraction to the title, "The Little Child Will Lead Us." It may not be another that's
John Courage, Catholic here.
the officer Queen, the person that is topic. It was interesting.
And Neil Fellis, 2003, and I'm just interested.
Thank you. That's the room. Who have we got out there in cyberspace? Someone jump in. Be brave.
Hi, it's Bill Strong out here in. I'm serving CBS, Conception Bay South. I'm talking to you from my beautiful home in North River.
Hi, Bill. Great to hear from you.
Okay.
Linda Budden, also calling from CBN, retired over 10 years, now back helping out in the parish of Portagrave, and always think we're never too old to learn. And good to hear your voice, Lisa.
Great to hear yours, Linda.
Somebody sent me notes that are computers, but they don't have microphones.
Very good. So there's others out there who may not be able to speak in. We'll keep moving. So still in the who category, I'm sorry, there's a lot on this slide, but really what matters is the first batch there. But the who category is, so who are we talking about when we say a little child's going to lead us these days? There hasn't been a name put on the current generation that are children and youth, whether they'll be Generation Z, which I know is hard to say in Canada, but I've had to learn to say that, or the iGen, the post-millennials, the centennials. Doesn't matter what they're called, it's important to know about them. These children and youth have never known a time when the phone wasn't in their pocket, and that you couldn't take a call on your watch. That's not a Dick Tracy phenomenon anymore. They cannot read an analog clock, trust me. And they don't know what we mean when we say quarter after or quarter till, because they don't read an analog clock. Most of them weren't even alive on September 11th, 2001. So that's part of their history studies and not their lived experience. And they're growing up and preparing for jobs that don't even exist yet, and that we probably can't even imagine. They've always known that they could look anything up, which means in their minds that they can know anything, but they don't have to remember it because they can look it up again, which makes teaching and learning in a classroom very different, because information doesn't need to be retained. They crave, the studies show us, they crave life-changing service experiences, and not just donating, but getting their hands dirty and being out in the world and doing real service. And they are claiming their voice in a really big way in public life, earlier in their lives than generations before them. At the same time, their parents are what researchers are calling the generation of broken promises. Their parents are historically witnesses to the downfall of lots of institutions they used to trust. Their parents grew up being told, just get a good education and that will guarantee you a great job, which it didn't. They were told to invest for retirement, but then there was a financial crisis of 2008 and a lot of loss in that. Told to buy big houses, which they now can't sell. Told that they're safer than any generation before them, and then 2 airplanes flew into the World Trade Centers, and more and more people are carrying guns. They were raised in faith communities and then have seen crisis after crisis or disagreement after disagreement in those faith communities. And so these parents tend to respond with a lot of anxiety and a great sense of control and a need for information. So for us in school settings, that means a lot of communication and a lot of bubble wrap, we say, and just a lot of anxiety that we're now sort of understanding why it's there. So that's the generation these kids are growing up with their parents feeling quite anxious and not knowing what's there for their kids. But we know that the scripture teaches quite clearly that parents are the primary disciple makers in the lives of their children. So in the church, we are meant to be partners with those parents, those anxious parents, needing to support them and equip them, needing to celebrate milestones and support them through losses and confusion and so on. So that's who we're working with. Does that make sense? Anybody meeting children and youth that are different than the ones I'm describing? Meeting non-anxious parents?
I'm just going to mention someone online has not muted themselves and we're getting a bit of interference. Will you correct that, please?
Thank you.
In the meantime, I want to comment on the synopsis you just did, because it makes me realize how intense the change has been in our world. That generation will see this change. It is for them the way.
It is the way, yeah. So what brought me to this topic of interest was a friend of mine, a classmate in the Doctor of Ministry program, and actually the woman in the office next door to me on my campus, who was doing some research and some writing and work around this concept of student voice. So in the literature and the practice of education, student voice and student choice is kind of a hot movement and has been for about a decade. It's bearing a lot of fruit. So it takes the traditional model of the classroom, the sage on the stage, which I hadn't really learned until I realized it's the way I was practicing education. Certainly the way I learned, in all of my learning, I think, really, including university and really including my theological education, was much out of that model. And then this concept of the kind of the flipped classroom, where now the teacher was a guide on the side, they say, but then moving even further into saying that the students have much to offer, and all the values in a room, or all the voices in a room, need to be really valued. It's a movement in education that's about really listening, which I think makes it an easy transition to a movement that could work in the church, because if our ministry is not about listening, we really are in trouble. So my friend that did all this research on student voice ultimately was able to really confidently claim that meaningful involvement in responsible roles will enable for students to develop their sense of identity, to develop competencies they need not only for engaged learning now, but also for their growth as healthy persons on the way to adulthood. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of keen on our world having some healthy adults. And if that has to do with listening to people before they're adults and involving them in making choices for their own learning, and in letting them tell us, give us some feedback on what we're doing in leadership, then I'm kind of all for it. So what are they looking for then? These post-millennials or I generation or whatever you want to call them. Gosh, isn't it great that the educational literature tells us the first thing they're looking for is a sense of dignity? And we have a document, a baptismal covenant, that says that's the business that we're in the church, of course, that we are to respect the dignity of every human being. A couple of years ago, I was at a chaplain's conference. The great speaker, Beth Sarah Wright, is the wife of the bishop, the Episcopal Bishop of Atlanta. And she stood in this room full of school chaplains. Most of us have had, nice bit of education, and talked to us about the concept of respect and pulled it apart in terms of its word origins and said, re is to do something again, to do it over. You return to something or you rebuild something, we all got that. Spect has to do with seeing. That's why they're called spectacles, the glasses we wear. So really, if you're going to respect, you're going to see again, or see in a new way, or see with a sort of freshness, or whatever that may be. Well, we all looked at her like she told us something we didn't know. A bunch of people talking about respect. I don't know what word I use more in my classroom than respect. Who hadn't thought about it as being literally taking something and looking at it anew. So what a great concept in looking at the voices of children and youth. Let's see them differently. Let's look at them differently. So educators then have learned that when students feel that they are seen and they're heard, they actually perform better. And that's data-driven, right? We can see that when that's happening, their test scores are higher and they're more thoughtful in their writing, in their presentations, and so on. And then it's even better again when they feel also valued and trusted. They should be feeling this way in the church. And I guess we're not administering tests, thankfully, but our data may be around whether they're showing up to things or contributing to things. I feel like that data would change as these things are in place too. And I feel like our youth who we see when they're able to be with us would tell us that it's because they feel valued, trusted, a contributing member of the church. And by the way, they want to earn the trust. Youth don't want to just be blindly given it. They actually want to earn it by being accountable to the clear expectations that we set. Kids like that. And the higher we set the expectation, the higher they'll rise. Teenage boys in this generation are mistaken as being kind of loners because they like to sit in their rooms and play these fantastic, elaborate video games. But they're not alone, right? The video games connect them all over the world because youth long for relationships. They're not loners. A sense of belonging is really important to them. It's where they find their worth, and it's where they find their safety. And they've got to feel worth and safety if they're going to come in the door in the first place. So it's essential for our process, if we're going to listen to what they have to say, that we give them this sense of worth, this sense of safety by giving them something to belong to that's worthwhile. And letting them know that we feel like we're partners with them. Again, pulling away from that sage on the stage. Like, I have all the answers to offer you, just come to my program. No, we want to partner with you in the work of the kingdom of God, which I think is a pretty good body of Christ concept, right? Paul might have had something to say about valuing every member of the body and not seeing any as lesser or whichever. And post-millennials, like the millennials before them, are more concerned than most other things about purpose and making a difference in the world. They're not really interested in engaging stuff that they can't figure out why they're doing it. So that's not a bad idea either. And lastly, there's this sense of tribe. If you don't know this book, it's published maybe about 2 years ago by Sebastian Junger about tribe. It's a great, short, easy read, just that tells the truth about how he focuses on actually soldiers returning from war and also communities in crisis after natural disasters and so on. But he talks about how resilient people are if they have a tribe, if they have a community to return to and a group of people they feel they can be a part of. It's sort of the default setting in, he would say, in all of humankind, but increasingly in every generation. And that really there's just better resiliency and better mental health if a person feels they're not alone. So it's a great resource, and it is. And what do they have to offer us? Well, this growing up generation right now, they have gifts that prior generations simply don't have because they didn't need them. And that's fun to uncover and discover. They can do things and see things and understand things and discern things that I'm never going to be able to. But I need to listen and to listen to those voices to have that. In your own settings, if you've never tried having kids teach seniors about how to use a computer or how to read email or how to Google something, give it a try. Fascinating. And by the way, it results in, of course, lots of story sharing and the building of great relationships and a young person being connected to a senior who's a great role model and has lots to share. I mean, far more comes out of it, of course, than learning to use a computer, but there's purpose in that, right? They feel there's purpose. They also have a really refreshing perspective to share with us. My 8th graders are not always honest with me about why their homework isn't done, but they're brutally honest about what they think about my work. So they have no filter when they want to disagree with me. And sometimes that really annoys me, but I really need to listen to it because I don't have the same perspective on what they're hearing as they're telling me about. So I really count on their perspective to keep me or bring me into some sense of reality and to make changes in what I'm doing so that it really is helpful to them. I'm going to do it in the way that's helpful to me. So it's great that they give me that kind of feedback. Let me show you a great little video, I think. How long is I did embedded this correctly. I did.
Can't stay on topic because his job is to distract and I'm not deflecting.
Oh, it's not there.
are deflecting.
Well, it's on my screen.
Check out a mirror.
Well, it's playing for everybody else online. I'll tell you about it in a minute.
Pure milk, pure moments, nothing else. Dairy Pure.
So, it's a milk ad. Oh wait, I need to cancel this or it's going to play the next video. Stop. It's a milk ad, you know, and the dad is sitting in the kitchen sipping coffee. Hello.
That's a milk ad.
There we go. He's why don't I have PowerPoint on my screen? Well, I'm sure that this, anyway, the dad is watching some terrible news, right? It's like the news, 24-hour newsreel, and he's drinking his coffee and he's getting visibly frustrated. And his son comes in and pours the cereal and turns the picks up the remote and turns the channel to some kind of cartoon and laughs, and all the tension kind of falls off dad, and he pours himself some cereal and puts the milk on it and giggles away. And thanks for that perspective, son. Like, just as we can get so bogged down in the stuff of our world, and then they just sort of bring us to some sense of reality. The other picture here is from the recent, not yet a year old on Ash Wednesday, on Valentine's Day, hashtag enough movement that grew out of the Parkland, Florida high school shooting last winter. The youth in that movement are standing behind this brand of hashtag enough. They're about done with, fearing for their lives in algebra class. But they are not, this movement is not obnoxious. In fact, it's surprising to people. They think thousands of teenagers are going to show up with signs. Oh dear. It's been named as being safer and more civil than any other sort of protest going on. The kids are completely rule compliant and have better behavior than the adults that show up to the same event in most cases. The numbers aren't in yet, but we think that this movement is responsible for a 20% or more increase in the voting across all generations in the recent midterm elections earlier this month in the U.S. Because their whole point about voice was to make sure everyone had voice by getting out the vote and so on. And so that's what I mean by they're sort of claiming their voice in a public square so much easier and earlier. What if they were out there talking about Jesus? Because that was as important to them. I just wonder. Okay, Rick, it's changing up there, but it's not on this screen. And I worry that means, oh, now it is again. Never mind, found it. Sorry. So where are we going to meet these people then to listen to them? It's not a good idea to just wait for them to show up. Or to sort of post posters and send postcards and assume that's going to happen. It's going to be necessary for us to just to go out and be with young people. But here's the fun part. For a while, probably while I was training, I think the way to go out and to be with young people was not to look like this, not to look like a priest, and to sort of look more like them, and to maybe squeeze some Jesus in, but really just be friendly, like a generation of parents who worked hard to be their kids' friends. That's not the way anymore. It's desirable to go out and look like church and to talk about a better world. I'm going to touch on that in my sermon today. It's desirable to people who, quite frankly, are a little bit scared about the world otherwise. In the conference where I first presented something along these lines was in Indianapolis last spring, and it was at their cathedral, where I learned that when you become a new member of the staff at the Episcopal Cathedral in Indianapolis, clergy or lay staff, You get a laptop computer, a cell phone, a key to rooms like this for larger gatherings and to a small setting for a pastoral encounter, but you don't get an office because they don't want their people in offices. They want them in coffee shops and the lobbies of business, executive buildings or whatever. They want them at events in the community. They want them in school cafeterias and all these sort of things. So there's no office. Go out and be where people are. So in this case, go out and be where young people are. I can't tell you how important it is to a 4-year-old to show up to the ballet recital or to a 15-year-old to be at a basketball game. I mean, I never have greater celebrity status than when I do that. I still don't understand basketball, but I'm there a lot. And that's where I hear stuff and the truth. Their defenses are down. I'm not the evaluating person. I'm not the teacher when I'm there. But I've already declared their worth, right? If they are worth my time in the evening, then maybe I'll hear what's important to them. I'm seeing what's important to them for sure. And then we need to remember that perhaps the best way to honor the dignity or even the mystery of these young people, or any people, by the way, all of this applies to every age. I'm just focusing on what I know best. But honor the mystery and the dignity of these people by remembering that we're meeting them at a time when God's already at work in their lives. And we're just stepping in and trying to listen for what God is already doing. Not to think like we're arriving to deliver God into their lives or to start that work or to ignite some sort of spirit in them. It's to come alongside and have that sort of ridiculously privileged position of being able to watch that happen and to hear that happen. We're listening to them, but we're also listening to what God is saying and doing in them, and maybe helping them to listen to that too, I guess. And then why? Well, mostly because Jesus told us to do it this way, right? This is greatness, right? This is the one that knows about the kingdom of God. Pay some attention. Don't send them away. Receive them and you'll receive me. We all know these texts, right? So that's not a bad idea. Senge, who's a great writer in both education and in systems theory. We all remember systems theory from our evening pastoral courses with Rick Singleton. Family systems, we all remember that. Systems thinking would say, take a learning orientation towards the young people. Involve everyone in your system in expressing their aspirations, building their awareness, developing their capabilities all together. Keep everybody in. It's incomplete without hearing all the voices. And some of the voices don't make any sense if you don't know the rest of the system in there anyway. John Vanier, who knows a thing or two about coming very close to the kingdom of God and who knows about people who are most vulnerable and least listened to, perhaps, reminds us that kids can hear and see and sense things that we don't anymore, and that they need to be invited to share with us in figuring out the best way forward. And invited now, not later. We need to give them all the power that comes from really honoring their dignity. There's power in that, listening to their voices. And then lastly, if you don't know Parker Palmer, you should. He's a Quaker of tremendous wisdom. And he has this whole concept of hearing people to speech, that behind the silence of people, our students, the people in our care, they really want to find their voices. And sometimes it's our job to help them find the voice to even speak in the first place, to create the space that's safe and that's encouraging and that where they know we're going to listen. A good teacher is one who can listen to voices even before they're spoken. So, hear those people into speech. Takes a lot of courage, but it's going to be worth it in the end. So we got all the way to why. Before we go to how, before I reveal my deep secrets about how this all works, I wonder if there's any questions or gaping holes in what I've already said, or great insights anyone's having that they need to share with everybody else.
Lisa, I want to make a comment from when I was in the parish of Buren. I had a visit from parents and a 9-year-old boy who happened to be a server in the congregation, and they had come up to pick up something at the rectory, and so I said, "Oh, come on in," and came on in through the rectory to the study. The office was in the rectory, as is here in this place, and he said, "Oh, Reverend, is this where you work?" And immediately I said, "No, I don't work here." "What?" "I work in other people's homes. I come to your house, and I work in the stages and the wharfs, which is what I did when I was on the Buren Peninsula. And sometimes there were people around who took pictures of that. They thought it was really quite something. But he was taken completely aback by that because, as you said earlier, we can't wait for them to come to us. We need to go where they are. And in Newfoundland, in some places, the school system now does not allow, since the non-denominational, does not allow very easily clergy to go into schools. When I first went to Buren, I was there for 8 years. The first 5 years were really good. I was invited into the school systems and to all classes, all ages, and as other denominations. But the last 3 years, it all shut down. I just want to share that experience that sometimes when they see the collar, they think either you work in church or this is where you work. This is your office. And you said they don't have offices wherever. They want you to be around, out and around.
And that's, I think, one of the changes that is coming, certainly. Yes. And, I grew up outside of Toronto where certainly there was no room for an ordained person to come in any official capacity into a school and do anything. But we used to have a United Church minister who was fantastic at playing euchre, which is the only thing you needed to do if you wanted to be in our high school cafeteria was play cards. Oh, yeah. And he showed up a couple of times a week and would sit and play cards with folks and just chat and so on. And so, and that sort of showing up in official capacity is kind of back to the stage on the stage kind of model that we say we're trying to perhaps move away from. Yes. That if we're going to build relationships, it's about showing up. Yeah. And listening to those that we're with and finding out from them what they want and need for us to do and what they're noticing about what we're already doing. They are so brutally honest, I promise. Mm-hmm. Other insights or thoughts, or before we get to the answer here? Oh, no, I don't have I am not the sage on the stage, so guess what?
I often thought that.
I was just going to make a comment, Lisa. You described my grandson to a T, and he's 13 and is exactly everything you said that he was. He is. That he's, he can look anything up online and doesn't retain anything. And the other thing is that it seems, I just came back from a COB meeting last night, and it's not hard to, you don't have to imagine that the uniform still carries importance and relevance to children today, because it works. That's all I can figure out, is that it works. I never figure out why it works, but just helped me affirm that it works.
The uniform on the kids, you mean, Bill?
Yeah, the CLB uniform, yeah. Yep. And on the leaders as well, like they they're looking for something to look up to, right? So it's there, it's still there, still relevant. I wear my collar a lot, and I'm never afraid to do so, and that for that very reason, the reason which you've alluded to, that people are looking for us.
Thanks, Bill.
You said a couple of things earlier in your conversation with us, that young people wish to do service. You also mentioned that they struggle with the meaning of life for want to make a change. And I think that's spiritual genius. And I think we need to get in touch with the idealism and the romanticism that is somewhat lost and tarnished. We need to get in touch with our own child within, join it with that which is out there, the young people who are not tarnished, I'm a 60-something. So, and I think that's the key to vocational renewal. It's a key to founding vocation, vocation to be a Christian disciple, and vocation in any manner that you understand the calling. I think that's the point that you have raised and emphasized in various ways that I'm going to take with me. And thank you.
Thank you. Service, by the way, is fantastic intergenerational work.
Yeah.
In a parish or other community setting. Years ago in parishes I was in Florida, we stopped doing the summer youth mission trip and started doing a spring break family and others mission trip, so that 10-year-olds and 50-year-olds were out there doing work together. And again, the stuff that gets discussed when you're, cleaning up an area or packing sandwiches or, whatever service that people are doing and engaged in, people feel very safe to have conversation when they're doing that kind of work together. There's some sort of common ground that's just immediate if you're both committed to doing something for those who need it done, and so there's a particular trust, I think, that just, and for a teenager who might just have an edge about adults, when the adult that comes with them to do that kind of dirty work, that person's in. That person's okay.
May I also just mention,
of course,
this will be short. Young people, one of the basic formational questions is, who am I? And how do they discover that? By doing stuff. And we can join them in that. So the project getting accomplished can be important, but the process is equally important, I think.
We've learned in the past decade so much about brain research and that sort of development in young people, and we just know, trust me, I teach 8th grade, that there's no frontal lobe, none. There's just no frontal lobe in a 13-year-old yet. A little bit coming along in the girls, none in the boys, which is the part of the brain that deals with impulse control and tough decision making. And it's good that we know that that's just brain development and it'll come. But what a great time to have the positive influence of other people in the community. What a great time to be asking, who am I, and discovering others in the community and the needs in the community that can be served while they're busy learning how to make choices. Let's show them what good choices look like while they're actually forming the part of them that's going to do that. It's great.
Thank you.
Folks, just before Lisa moves into the next section, how many will stay for lunch? We'll have some pizza brought in. We have the session will end, and we have Eucharist at noon. We're using the Advent series developed by Dr. Boyd Morgan. Lisa will preside and preach, and then we'll have some lunch. So, show of hands, those who might be staying with us. They're all welcome. Okay, good. I'll share that we'll.
I won't be here. I have an appointment.
Okay, yeah. Fine. But anyway, you're all welcome.
Thank you. I have another appointment.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Lisa, I just want to comment on one thing before you start, this part about We are.
Excuse me, and also you can drift back and forth and grab a coffee for yourselves if you want, rather than take a break for sake of those who are online or lose.
How often we thought that we had to fill children and young people with spirituality and faith because we thought they were empty, and that's not so. And I think the biggest learning for me in that is since I've been involved in godly play, and that children are spiritual beings from the very beginning, and they need us as much as we need them along the way.
Absolutely, and I think that Godly Play is a great program that just embraces that of course the child knows God, and of course the child has a relationship with their Creator, and how wonderful it would be to help them, know the stories and ask the questions and do the wondering. Such great language in Godly Play about I wonder. And by the way, that practice we don't outgrow it just because we're finished teenage years or something. Those questions are important for us to, and maybe it takes the young people to remind us about those questions while we think we have all the answers. So I think for this kind of work, this kind of listening and hearing the real voices and real needs of young people who have some idea about moving us all forward, it's really important that we have the right kind of mindset in our community that will naturally invite the listening and will naturally foster the kind of dignity that we're saying, again, is already in these people, of course, by virtue of being a child of God. By the way, this kind of mindset is not a bad mindset for lots of other reasons in a faith community or in life. But in the context of student voice, this South African concept of Ubuntu, or there's many pronunciations, I'm not likely doing it correctly, but taps on these realities that the research says is what young people are looking for, the sense of belonging and their right to dignity. That dignity is not something they'll achieve when they're 18, but that they've already got and that we'll already enjoy. So in South Africa, when people meet, it's not unusual for the first greeting to be from person A to person B to be, I see you. And the reply from B to A to be, I am here. And the order of that exchange, we learn, is really significant. It means that until you see me, I don't exist. And when you do see me, you bring me then into existence. And I think this is how young people can feel, right? Is that they just don't exist because they're not seen.
Especially when so many models are around being seen and not heard.
Absolutely, right? That's what, didn't we hear? We'll have the children seen and not heard. Exactly. So Desmond Tutu always says that this concept, Ubuntu, is not just hard to pronounce, but hard to kind of translate into English language. But he calls it the essence of being human. I am human because I belong, which is a great, I have no trouble reconciling that with scripture and with, our ecclesiology, that to be is to be part of something. I can reconcile that easily. It speaks, he says, about wholeness, about compassion, a person practicing this kind of mindset is welcoming and hospitable, warm, generous, willing to share. And finally, says Tutu, a person is a person because he recognizes others as persons, which, in our modeling of that for young people, it will become habitually their practice then too, right? Middle schoolers are hilarious. We call them middle schoolers in the southern U.S. Junior high people, 11, 12, 13-year-olds are hilarious, right? They really are truly sorting out their identity issue around who am I. Their bodies are a mess, just a hot mess, right? And they literally, we say they're self-centered, but that's not a criticism. It just means really what's going on in their head is me, 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 me. And it happened to us all. We were all there. And I always find it hilarious because it manifests physically. A middle schooler will plow right into me in the hallway every day. Like, they literally have no physical sense of other people because there's so much going on, but it's such an exciting time to be part of their lives. What a ridiculous privilege it is to be alongside someone who's trying to discern who they are and who they're meant to be and what they're supposed to do. And they have a lot to say while that's happening, and it's truly valuable. And I think in our communities, the things that a young person says about themselves as they're figuring it out are likely reflective of our communities too. So if they're saying, I just don't really know what I'm supposed to do, I take a look at the whole kind of community ethos and say, does this community have any idea what it's supposed to do? Or like, I just don't know what my place is, or I just don't know who trusts me. Wait now, who trusts this place and this community? Or in the questions they ask about themselves, if I can step back and ask them about the whole community, or invite the community to ask that whole question, what if I take that to a vestry meeting and say, who trusts us? Or who wants to be a partner with us? Or which really was the 13-year-old question, but now I can apply it to, I think I just called a parish a middle schooler, but.
That speaks a lot to issues that we have in church around identity and around community, because if you're trying to do those kinds of pieces, then there's a lot of risk involved. And people don't want, like, for example, if I ask some of those questions in our parish context, some young people might say, well, I don't understand fully what's going on here, so let's just stop everything. And if I'm serious about fully listening and being present, then I will stop. And the risk there is everybody else is like, well, no, we can't. We have to continue on, right? So we're already in this in parish senses, in diocesan senses as well, is that what is happening, not everybody is fully engaged in the community. So if we're going to fully engage, we got to stop. But what about getting through Sunday morning at 11 o'clock? What about financial pieces? What about what we've always done for fellowship and community within community? This is a whole thing that people aren't, I don't think people are really ready to grapple with in a lot of senses.
Yeah, and I think that, obviously jumping with both feet and the whole of ourselves into any of these sort of models is dangerous. But the listening can bear such fruit that I think small doses, and then some great celebration of the fruit it bears, right? So like when I notice the fruit that some kind of listening or conversation and some transformation because of it is born, some fruit is born, then I'd better be talking about it in the pulpit on Sunday morning, or I'd better have a young person up there saying something, so that, and then eventually it becomes somewhat contagious, right? Because it feels great, the fruit, even though the work is hard. So I think then just being totally transparent in this. By the way, you have to be totally transparent with young people. They can smell a fraud from a county away, right? So, and that's not a bad, transparency seems like a pretty good practice. So if they're calling for it, then taking what we need to provide to them and providing it for others too may not be a horrible idea. So, continuing in the how piece, if we're going to insist, then I love that a lot of the literature and education just uses that really strong verb and says, just insist on these kind of principles that, like respect is this two-way street, right? So I'm going to look differently at this young person. I'm going to ask this person to look differently at me and at this community, and then I'm going to ask the young person to tell me what they see when they look differently, to borrow that concept of seeing again in respect. Yeah, so communication is more about listening than talking, right? We all know that. We all prepare couples for marriage by telling them that. And then we talk a lot, says the person yammering on at the front of the room. But, communication is about listening and not just talking. And so the literature would say that's important. And then this word investment, which is not just about money. Do have a line in your budget that is substantial for the work of youth and children. Don't get me wrong. But investment, of course, we know is about time. And time is so tricky because these young people they have to be working. They might work on Sunday morning. What other time have you got for them? What if they get to set the time? So I have to go to basketball at 8 p.m. So making that sort of investment. Space is part of the investment. All of this is so, is just key. And then, is it meaningful? Because they're not interested if it's not. People who are asking the question, who am I, are looking for meaning in their own lives. And they're done if what we're doing is not meaningful to them, and that, or if we make some sort of commitment and completely fall through on it. I want to listen to you. Your voice really matters. But we're going to continue to hold youth group, only during the education hour on Sunday mornings. But your voice is so valuable. Really? So that kind of meaning, it's got to be meaningful. We weren't allowed to say meaningful when we were students at Queen's College. And I'm just rolling it right out here. All right. So a warning, this now gets a little gimmicky for a couple of slides. I'm sorry, but educational authors are like that. But they're not wrong in what they're teaching, and so it's a bit gimmicky for a minute. But if that means, you can't go to sleep at night without thinking of this, then I guess the gimmick really worked, right? So these authors of really recent work on student voice, right? 2018, this work is published. Just says, ask them. Ask what people want and need. Now, I clearly was not raised being asked that question, because I still don't have an answer when people just say to me, well, what do you need? I don't know. So I guess it's about, really helping people even figure out how to answer that question. Offer that kind of support. My gosh, to someone who they feel rudderless often, young people, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody else in this room would do high school again, but I wouldn't. And so to kind of enter into that with some sense of empathy that says their lives are just rocky right now. So my support, whatever that looks like, but they get to tell me what support looks like. I don't get to decide that this is what you need. Knowing their feedback, well, if we're going to ask for it, we have to pay attention to it. Like I tell you, those 8th graders, they're brutally honest with what they think about my teaching and my style of things or my communication. But if I'm not paying attention to it, then why am I even doing it? Empowering their leadership, their participation. And all these other things we've talked about have said that power, they'll feel power when they feel listened to and they feel noticed and trusted. And then this is really important. Thanks, David. Monitor the results and the follow through of it, right? So watch and see what happens. And this is hard. As a teacher, I evaluate others all the time, right? It's my job. But evaluating myself means really watching for the results of what I'm doing and where does it bear fruit. And it takes a long time. But monitoring is so, so important. Okay, one more good gimmick here. C is not just for cookie. There's that communication one again. So I remember from first grade, my own first grade or grade 1, I forget where I am, what I'm supposed to say. Mr. Garnsworthy was my grade 1 English half of the day. I was an immersion teacher. He was 6.5 feet tall and he taught first grade. And he was the son of the Bishop of Toronto. But anyway, he used to do this exercise with us when we had to give him instructions. He would stand with his back to us and we had to tell him instructions on how to make a peanut butter sandwich. And then he would do exactly what we said, right? So if you didn't include the detail about how to open the bag, like if you just said take out 2 slices of bread, he'd just tear open the bag and take out the bread and spread the peanut butter. If he didn't mention the knife, he used his hands. Or if he didn't even mention spread, he might put the whole jar on the bread. I mean, he was genius in the way he did it. I remember that. I was 6, and I remember that sort of activity. And so I remember that his purpose was to teach us about communicating with details, right? And that and what it was to sort of to do what people said, but only what they said. And that anyway, I use that exercise when I'm preparing a couple for marriage, and we haven't handled that. We don't use peanut butter anymore. It's a terrible allergen. It's very dangerous. Seemed to have been fine when I was 6, but anyway. So, I mean, if we're going to say that the communication is important, we have to work on that. And we have to equip young people with tools to communicate to us. And we have to learn a lot about the way they communicate. By the way, these, short forms in text messaging and stuff, like you just have to know them. So we have to learn from them about how they communicate. It's terrible. They cannot spell. And that doesn't mean that we have to slide into some poor sense of spelling and grammar, by the way, but just be prepared and know how to read those sort of things. But we have to do the work of knowing how to communicate, not just assume that, we should communicate and then be upset when it doesn't go well. So collaboration then is the next piece of that. The smartest person in the room is the room, right? That let's do this work together. Kids feel fantastic about this when they feel like they're involved in a process. It really lifts them up. And again, this is the Pauline model of the church, right? Like, this is not new. Oh, Lisa had such a great idea on Wednesday. We should collaborate in being the church in the world. No. The eye can't say to the foot, I don't need you. This is the model of the church. And that those parts that might seem of lesser value, all this, right? So the collaborative is important. As I mentioned before, the critical thinking, my gosh, kids can smell a fraud from a mile away. And it's no longer about dumbing down our Jesus to make him appealing and weak. And it's not about that at all. My gosh, if we don't tell young people the truth, they're not interested. They don't feel valued. We said earlier that feeling valued matters so much to them. Then why are we lying to them or giving them half the truth? Telling them the truth is really important. And they can engage in the truth telling then with us. And the creativity piece, I'm not very good at this. I'm great at thinking creatively, but putting it into action, I'm not into Pinterest. All my teacher colleagues have all these beautiful classrooms. I have an apple as the designs because it's easy to cut it out of construction paper and put it on the door. Also, I want God to have me as the apple of his eye. So it works theologically too. But anyway, creativity is so important. And this is where I think imitation is just the highest form of flattery, right? There's a lot of really creative stuff going on. And begging and borrowing and stealing is fine. But these kids, because of what they work with electronically and stuff, are highly creative. So it's okay for them to laugh at me for my lack of ability to pull it together and for me to say, fine, if you can do a better job, do it yourselves. And then they have a fantastic time. So draw on their own let them be creative in it. And by the way, the seniors in the parish often have great creative ideas too that kids can really get into. So I think that's really important too. All right, I'm done with the gimmicks. My own research for my Doctor of Ministry degree was on character education, which it used to be like a gazillion-dollar industry in education. But it involved posters and bookmarks and buttons and ribbons. And I said, why don't we just get people together and let them tell stories? And so my whole research was about having children build partnerships with adults in a parish, and people that we could identify as being people of character, whatever that means. The storytelling was just phenomenal. Surprisingly to me, it's always the doctoral defense question, right? What surprised you? Was how much the storytelling worked in both directions, how much the adults that I thought, as Charlene mentioned, had so much to pour into these children, how much they came out feeling like they had learned something new, that they had respected, right? They had looked differently or seen differently. So the storytelling is so important. And everybody speaks story. And it's harder to find story on Google. Having said this generation has everything they need at their fingertips, or they think they do. The story is there, but it's harder to find it. You're going to find a lot of data and facts, and more than half of it's wrong, but you're going to find that first. Story has to come from people. We know that trust and relationship come out of story, and along with a desire for just more and more and more of it. And we are people of story. It's the church is. It's founded on and built on and keeps running by telling the story. So I think that telling stories and listening to stories and then daring to write new parts of the story together is really important. So I just think and story is safe, and people can enter into it as much or as little as they want, but everybody knows how to do it. I love this J.K. Rowling. That's Harry Potter J.K. Rowling, of course, that says story will transport people to another place. And we all have days where we'd rather be somewhere else. So there's the story piece. Are those helpful tools? Does it make some sort of sense? I have a serious warning to issue. If you do this, children and young people are going to have an increased sense of agency. They're going to feel like they belong, and that church or faith or discipleship belongs to them as much as it belongs to you. Which means they're going to be around in their own particular ways, and they're going to ask questions, and they're going to want to change things, because they have agency that we've given to them. So be aware. They'll notice that things change when they speak up, and if they do, guess what? They'll speak up more. Seen and heard. And they'll start to call themselves leaders. So just be warned that this could change things. But if you think things need to change, then I guess that's my argument, that this might be a worthwhile way to do it. That's what I got. Let's talk. Anybody?
It was very interesting and challenging as well.
Throughout your whole presentation, please, I couldn't but help but think about Archbishop Ted Scott, who never ceased to say that the youth of the church are people of the now and not the future. And
Thank
that's
you.
what, and you are all that we've heard today from you has just amplified. And I believe it to be true. I've always believed it to be true. And the respect part, which I think very slowly we are beginning to adopt in some models, but it's a very slow process. It does come out of the baptismal covenant, which we emphasize again and again. But at the same time, the listening process is so much fundamentally common now, and the dismissive forms that most of us grew up with, where our voice was not important. Decisions would be made, and we would be told how things should be and what we were to aim for. And that is one of the most exciting things of coming to something like this and hearing from somebody who's working in this sort of area every day. And I think I have an appreciation for anybody in a didactic role today as to how much change there has been in the whole process. Just as I always used to say to people here, you don't know how fortunate you are to have education here at Queen's College, which invites active participation. And because what you are contributing is fundamentally important to everyone.
Indeed.
And we never had that opportunity. We were talked at, note, take, and produce. And that's how it was for most of them. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that idea that you say about those models of we have the answers, we're just going to give them to you, and then there's an expectation. And then we look back and ask, well, why aren't they following? Well, what about involving? And when you said about decision making, what sense of ownership does a young person have if they're involved in making the decision? Their participation levels just, exponentially are going to rise because there's ownership, and they're ready for it. And then to just have decisions made and imposed, well, why buy into that?
I just want to share something else because everything that you're saying sounds like my grandchildren. They're not, the boy's 9, the girl is 6. And, I see them once or twice a year. They live in Tucson in Arizona. So and they come up here, but they always, they're into this, I guess it's the listening to each other or listening one at a time. One is not always the boss. And I remember Heath, my grandson, saying, Nana, you are not the supervisor. Oh, okay. I will be the supervisor for the first part for today. And then maybe Azalea will be he has taken charge, right? He's going to be the supervisor, or she will be, the girl will be the supervisor. Supervisor, that's the word he uses, not leader. Supervisor, oversee, watch everything, right? And direct, all that kind of thing. And I'm where are these words coming from? And this behavior, and I can only think back to my daughter, I guess, so completely organized and maybe something like her mom, right? But, with that kind of structural thing that she has always had to have, and I think I always had to have, and maybe a lot of us growing up, we were taught to think ahead, plan ahead, have that structure, but kids it's like all over the place. You go into a classroom and they have learning center here, learning center there, there, and they're all talking around there like, this is school? It was an eye-opener for me, and that was years ago. I mean, that's increased now to the point of how can I put it, interrelationships between teachers and teachers helpers and whatever they're called, and all that kind of thing, and parents, like they're in the classrooms, and they're all talking. We couldn't open our mouth. And even if my dad was my teacher, he if I opened my mouth, I would tell you, I heard when I got home, because he taught me some of the classes, and like most of us anyway, go to the principal's office. Don't open your mouth. Don't turn around. The church especially. But being with Girl Guides and things, and when you were talking about that age, I would say 10 to 14, 15, whatever, who am I? Where do I belong and all that, and with youth groups in the church and all that, over all those years, right? It's spot on. Because they want to have their say, and they're going to say it. And we have to listen.
Because it's worthwhile.
Yeah. And the problem is, though, that only one of the big problems is that most often we, the church, has not listened to leaders, or what we call leaders. Let the little children lead us. Let them be leaders. Yeah.
It transfers over also into, as I was listening, to the child within each of us, and trying to realize that, it's not just the children that we're talking about. It's talking about us, with this child within each one of us. And a child that's been developed in some ways based upon a structure that doesn't apply in this day and age. We live over a congregation, and the church is really bad. It's because what happens on Sunday morning? The man with the jug goes into the pulpit and he pours. Yep. And there's no interaction, and there's nothing to bring out of people this within them, right? So it's what you say applies to kids. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, one realizes you've done a wonderful job presenting that this morning. And working with children, you realize, they've always been somewhat like that, but they're more so in this day and age than ever before, right?
I agree, and I think I have better adult relationships since I've been working with children.
I'm sure, yeah.
Because what I learned from, what I learned from the way I need to relate with young people it does apply across the board, and it does teach me to listen better, which of course I need to listen more to the adults in my life also, who are my friends and my family and with whom I have relationships or whatever, my colleagues. So working with children has made me a better, I think, adult in relationship as well.
Sure. Bigger is not better. Just think, like in my context, any one of the congregations, the only congregation that I could attempt to address that meaningful even with regards to liturgy would be our evening liturgy, because we get a dozen maybe. But when you're starting to look at those kinds of pieces and say, yeah, you're pouring stuff out to the congregation, you're not addressing the wisdom of the community. We set ourselves up that we have these buildings where we're so far apart from each other, and we have these processes that don't foster engagement and listening, except to one person on a microphone.
Sage on the stage.
Yep. And it's not about that, and we have to, like, in, 93 or 94, I was chaplain at Canterbury Hills Conference Center and Camp in the Diocese of Niagara, and we went through a process where just the staff, it was a staff of 25, 30 people, we were trying to come up with the theme for the camping program for the summer. So all the people who were invested in that went in, and it was an open space concept, and they were doing all the stuff that Niagara does and all that kind of thing. We spent 4.5 hours trying to figure out, because everybody was given a voice. And it was so frustrating for some people who were not able to work within that process of let's listen to other people and let's find the wisdom of the room. Because it was so many, 25 to 35 people, right? I couldn't imagine, if Rick took all the faculty, I don't know how many faculty you have, but said, okay, well, what are we going to do? There'd be 35 or 40 voices around the room. So how do you balance out the need for moving forward in a direction, offering what's going to happen, and listening to the wisdom of the entire? We just went through this whole process in our diocese, of a diocesan commission, where 1,000 people spoke to various groups at various times. But that's only 1,000 people out of 28,000 people. And yet it doesn't fully engage in so many ways.
Which is why an hour on Sunday morning cannot be the only place we want to or plan to engage people, right? It's why small group models for formation offer a certain place for that to happen, especially because of the trust that grows in that model. But it's why the coffee shop, other event, other setting sort of thing is so important. And it takes a lot of time. And I'm not sure that, I am sure that not everyone, but I'm not sure that even a majority of people yet sort of are ready to accept that that's a good use of our time as leaders in the church, to sort of be out in the world one-on-one or small group or whatever with people. It's not as efficient as 300 people in the pew on Sunday morning at all, but efficient and effective. What are we looking for? And so I think that it's that's part of the reason why, if this is going to work, it is going to look different. Listening to any voices of any age just has to happen in a different way. It's why the technology is important, right? I have friends that are really good at these little 3 to 5 minute video clips now that go out instead of writing an article, because my gosh, nobody's going to read 250 words. But they'll listen to 1,000, listen to and view 1,000. So these little video clips. So it's great to hear the sermon in the space with 400 people, but then what if at home on Wednesday in your email box comes something that feels like the leader is speaking directly to you? I don't know. I mean, that's why that's working in some cases. And then feedback comes from the individual who's watched that when it's convenient to them, right? All these ideas, we have to have a lot of courage to try them, because they don't look like what we've always done. Yeah. But what we've always done is just not enough. I don't know, these kids in the Parkland, Florida movement, they did a lot of coffee shop kind of work, just sitting and talking to people. And like I say, they were so well behaved, and not, and their message got across, people and they told their own story. And people felt compelled to listen to that. I don't know. I don't think it's easy. I hope I haven't made it sound easy or made it sound like I actually know what I'm doing. It's not, but I think it's working.
I suppose one of the challenges always when trying to see what model can work or what adjustment need to be made to be relevant in the current and future is how you manage the transition. Most of us, and I had the privilege, if we were to use that word for it, of attending 3 synods this fall, as well as been involved with the renewal ventures of Roman Catholic Archdiocese. And like all of this is all about, everyone, and all together between the sessions that I attended in the 3 synods and the Roman Catholic Archdiocese, there may have been a total of 12 people under 20. So we have a lot of people with big heads of hair like me and the colours of my sideburns, trying to sort out what we can do for youth. And that's wonderful if they're concerned. And I think we all envisage somehow or other a time when there will be an opportunity for that generation to respond to the love of Jesus, to call it the gospel. But the transition is what is the challenge. How is it facilitated? And there's, you know, how do you manage the both and, as people would say about it, you know, reaching into a new model to at least hear in the room, hear from the youth, hear from that generation. But then there are those who are part of church as it has been evolving, and it isn't to be shut down because we're starting something new, like most organizations have to have a transition plan. And that's where, you know, so much of this stuff, I think, what you were saying here today is really timely to me, and I have to tell you why, because we're into a venture. Some of you will get an email from me on it, perhaps over the next few hours, at least in the next couple of days. And it is, we want to hear from you about an effort that we need to undertake, I believe, in response to what I've heard in the three synods, to have a systematic approach to missional leadership. We need to be offering program studies, whether they're for credit or not, but that it's about missional leadership. And some of it is skill stuff. You know, the theoretical is so important, but the how to do it is what people. I was at a Western Synod the other day, and I was speaking about Queen's College and what have you. And but one of the things I used just as an example was, you know, are we equipping people adequately, for instance, to welcome back people when they show up, having been away for years, and they happen to show up away for a funeral or on a Sunday morning? Do we have the skill set to be able to welcome them without embarrassing them or without making them feel awkward or feeling awkward ourselves? It was amazing how many people said to me during the coffee break, you know, that's exactly where I am. I don't know what to say to people when they show up. Some people were clergy, some were lay. But we haven't really
Experienced it.
acquired the skills, you know.
Yeah.
And that's just as simple, but I think this missional leadership is about theory, theology, evangelization, but especially skills.
Oh.
You know, hardcore skills that we need. Anyway, that's just a promo. See every opportunity to do so.
And I think, you know, I think that then I would say, is anybody asking the person who showed up after X number of years to the funeral, to the whatever, has anybody asked them how their experience was? Because did they feel awkward, or are we projecting our own anxiety about it onto somebody else, or are we perceiving something that is there, isn't there, or what would have been helpful to them? I guess going to the source for that information. You know, David talked about the theme. We have a theme in our school every year. It's usually sometimes a scripture verse, a line from a hymn, a line from the prayer book, whatever. And it's often really easy. Let your light shine, because we have 3-year-olds. We also have 14-year-olds, and so it has to be meaningful kind of across the age range and so on. Well, this year we started to decide as an administrative team, because that's who makes the decision. And by the way, on the administrative team, I teach in a classroom. Nobody else does. But anyway, we decided to go with what the National Association of Episcopal Schools was going with, and it was a verse out of Isaiah: learn to do what is right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. So right away people said, well, can't teach that to 4-year-olds. Can't teach that. Oh, our 4-year-old teachers are preschool teachers, and they're going to be so upset. And oh, even in 3rd grade, they'll be so upset about that. And well, let's talk to the teachers about that. And I finally said, do you mind if I talk to some children? I mean, first of all, I think I have an idea of how we can sort of do this in an age-appropriate way. Do you trust me for a couple of weeks to look into this? And so therefore, you know, went and did some work with children and then asked them, what does justice mean? Because we had decided they couldn't understand it, but we didn't ask them if they understood it. And so there's data for lots of things, but then there's not. You just have to go to the source and say, like, did you get that? I didn't even begin the process assuming I should go to the children. It's just the more I heard, they won't get it. They won't. I thought, do they? Have they? Will they? Can we go to them and talk? So I think that's so important. So I don't know. I mean, I think that maybe part of the both and is then including everybody in that process, right? So the person who comes and sits in the pew on Sunday morning in their spot, we can ask them the question too.
So they did understand as a result of the research which you did, because they did adopt the theme.
We did adopt the theme because we realized there were age-appropriate ways to work with that, No, you're not going to talk to 3-year-olds with the word oppress all the time, but they know a lot about fairness when they're 3, by the way, so we can sort of start there and or they have some experience anyway. So listening to, has anybody asked, which is good communication process, right? It sort of removes that crazy triangle, talking about and not talking to. Let's actually involve that other party in our conversation. We know these things. This is not, I don't have a new idea. I just have some sort of renewed energy around it, I think.
I think of all I've heard this morning, and I've heard, similar pieces of this before, the word that keeps coming into my head is we cannot assume. And we know we should never assume anyway, but we always do it. We just assume people know what we're talking about. We assume that we think this is how young people are. We assume this is how a community is supposed to operate. And it has nothing to do with that at all. And it's dropping that to really collaborate and communicate and be creative.
And give people voice, not make the assumption that I know what they think or they feel. It's pretty empowering to give people the opportunity to express themselves. And that's true whether they're 13 or 83. That says, I value you. I see you. That's the Ubuntu, right? I see you, which means you exist. And you didn't before I said, I see you. And I hear you, and I value what you have to say. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just feeling like they actually heard me is enough. And it's perhaps increasingly rare.
It's one of the things I think I have learned as a grandmother and a grandparent is getting down on the level with my granddaughters and being there in the lessening presence and just being there and finding the joy that they exuberate. And it's finding my child that is in me again. And I give thanks for that. And all this that you have said today, the listening and being, is all tied in and it resonates with just about everything that I've learned this semester in my course. And the mission part of it is really under the water, because when I asked for guidance with the theme that I needed to tie in, that's the word that came to me is mission. So whether it is Jesus' mission as he went out and as he taught us, as he asked us to do, and then we go out and do that mission and being disciples of him and bringing all of everybody back into his fold. Wow, this has just blown me away this morning. Divine intervention works. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone online have any questions or comments? Okay, any others here?
I think I just as Bill's trying here. I'm just taking back to your comments, Rick. That we really need to know how to where to put the next foot forward in the whole missional business and understanding the dynamics of every situation. That's the part that I don't think that for the church we can't be ex nihilo. We just can't invent it out of nothing. There has to be, especially in the rural context, we have to realize that we have to work with what you got, right? So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's a constant quest. But I do appreciate hearing that other people are in the same boat.
And even with all that, you still make it your own where you are. Like the how-to is not going to work exactly the same way in every location.
Yeah. And that's where effective pastoral leadership comes in. Being able to, just as every grieving person or every couple who's coming for marriage prep or parents bringing children for baptism or every person you have to have that spiritual resilience within yourself to be able to assess what is in front of you and respond as well as you can. And I think, and it's often said that any renewal in the church will have to be a contemplative renewal. And I think that's what will be so important in any mission efforts, is that to make sure that the people who are endeavoring to give leadership have a deep-rooted capacity to listen from the experience of listening, to scripture, through contemplation, and through engagement with others. And because tricks of the trade are good, but they really only work when the tradesman has experience and has that ability to know what's happening when they hear the engine rumbling or rattling or whatever the case might be. And I think, within it, for those who are in leadership roles in the church, an important piece of it is bringing the awareness that there's a lot of soul work for individuals and how that connects. I love the book. I'm not familiar with it, but I will pursue it. The one by Younger. I love that word, tribe. Mm-hmm. And it speaks well. And I guess in some ways that's what we would be endeavoring to do, is to bring tribe together and the tribes within, and we all contribute. It's to say it's the root word, contribute. So that bringing it together and the ties that bind are so important, whether it's in family context or otherwise.
Well, and I think
lots to reflect on from your presentation.
Yes.
I don't mean to fuss anyone off.
No, the listening, of course, bringing more voices to the table to listen to, of course, doesn't mean that it only creates more work for us, by the way, because it doesn't diminish the voices already there.
Yeah.
Of course, also the voice that we need to listen to that moves and is moved by the Spirit and is the voice that speaks to us out of the scriptures and out of the traditions and out of our own life of prayer. And then I think, I have always tried to view my own ministry with children and young people through a lens of saying, what are they observing by just watching me and the way that I live every day and conduct my business. And, and so the transparency about that listening is really important so that they can develop the skills, the exact skills we're talking about developing ourselves, the transparency about that. So I need to make sure that I'm clear, that I'm praying about these things and talk about how that's working for me and what does that voice bring I better be bringing that voice to the table And again, that transparency is so important, so that I'm modeling for a young person that, hey, maybe you should take that choice you're making in your own life, take that to God. There's another voice you need with all the competing voices in a young person's life. So that transparency, thanks, Rick, that's part of it too, that's right. I had to take a note here that about every renewal is a contemplative renewal, of course. Can't leave God out of this business. That'd be foolish.
I think the other thing, going back to what you were saying about transition, what I hear in your presentation pieces today, and which is intrinsically different to the way in which I've heard transitioning expressed. I remember one person, and it was well meant, when the person got up and said this, and the individual said, in transition, there are always going to be casualties. Okay? And we know that that's true. But in transitioning today, we are also beginning to exhibit far much more care, pastoral and otherwise, to those who see things differently, but still try to bridge the gap until such time as the people can see that what has been proposed was indeed and has been right for the community, and the community is not censorious about them. The community welcomes them in, and that's a very major step, I believe, from where we have been in the past. And as you say, it involves far more work on the part of everybody to see that happening.
Because it's grief and bereavement.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Transition brings joy and transition brings loss. And you have to deal and hold both at the same time. And everyone's voice is part of that, and that there is still a place for everyone to belong.
It's not a new story either, and I think, it's sometimes with learning the scriptural story with children, will literally physically have them make, attach all their pages of learning about the Bible into some sort of book that still has pages at the end. That the story you're living in your own in your own journey, et cetera, is still part of the story of the people of God, in the way that this story of Isaac is this story of Joseph is the Moses. That these are, and so to remember that this is not a new story once upon a time, but rather another chapter. Take that one over. My computer's not even here. Another chapter in that same story that just builds on, then maybe that lessens the blow, and says that what's past is valuable. It's still part of the story. We're not undoing. We're adding to and carrying on and looking forward, which is what I'm about to preach about. But yeah.
Any other comments or observations, questions?
We've been in transition for a number of years. We transitioned from the old Book of Common Prayer to the Book of Alternative Services. That was a transition, and it was a difficult one for a lot of people. And we had to stand by them in times when I tried to encourage them to look deeper at this,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So translation, it's difficult,
Yes, it
but
is.
it can be done, but it got to be done with patience and care and love for every person.
And with the hymn books now too, I mean, there are still congregations who refuse to use the new terminology
Yes, sir.
and the new common phrase.
Yes, sir.
Completely
Yeah.
refuse.
Oh, yes.
My parish is one of them.
I'd like to go back to the youth. I guess there's one thing that I think we have to do as leaders, is we have to make ourselves uncomfortable.
Oh, gosh.
And let the youth sometimes take that leadership role and sit back, and even if they don't do it in the same order that you would do it, you've got to know, you've got to step back and give them that power to do it.
Yeah.
I've put myself in that role a few times with guiding and had many a sleepless night, but in the end, when a group of teenagers say, we can do Kent without you.
Yeah.
And I just said,
That's
prove it.
Yeah.
And they realized they had to take me for
Church
the license, but other than that, they did the whole thing. And,
I think one of the things that Lisa's presentation brought to mind, and it wasn't as clear to me at all, it wasn't even in my mind, of how relevant it is for us to be aware of the different worldview altogether of the children and the younger teens, well, even up to 20 years old now, and beyond that even, that their experience of life and the world and how problems are solved, or even what is a problem. I mean, it's always been a generational thing to some extent anyway, but it's just so different now. And your point about that you don't need to remember things. When you said that, I remember, like, literally having things beaten into me in school, because you had to remember them, and that was all was to it. And so, the 5 reasons for the First World War, everything was boiled down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and what have you. And that was the way we learned, and that's how we showed what we knew. And I'm not sure what else it accomplished. But that's such a different world now in how children learn and how they integrate things and what have you. And I guess it's incumbent on us to figure out how do we connect with that and respect it and what have you. And also to draw on, as Tom had mentioned a few moments ago in Berdina, the changes, the transition that I've had. I mean, there's a lot of lessons learned, and a lot of it looks back to the point that Charlene made. I mean, how those lessons were learned and how it was done in different places had to respect the context. And that includes also the people who were in leadership roles. They were the ones who influenced it one way or the other, as it was in the beginning, as now, and will be forever. Maybe. So these are some of the intriguing things about the challenge today. But your presentation to us today, Lisa, is really timely because it's right on the heels of all of the churches, all of the dioceses in our province looking at, where to from here. We know that we just can't sit on the egg and expect it to hatch. It just ain't going to be that simple. But there is lots to hatch and lots of life, but we need to bring it out in the best possible ways. I'm just going to ask if there's any last minute comment or question before we wrap it up, or comment from you either, Lisa.
No, I'm grateful I took some notes too. I'm grateful for everyone's input, and I'm always learning. And I'm of course grateful for the opportunity to bring this here and just to add to my own story and to the story here with it. And I think it's a very exciting time to be part of this.
I think that is the challenge to all of us, is to be aware that this doesn't have to be a sense of oppression or a sense of or a reason for depression, especially for people in leadership roles. That it is, it's really I read this morning the passage Lazarus being unbound, and in many ways that's where we are now. There's an unbinding happening that can really allow us to come back to life in new ways. It will take courage, but it'll be wonderful, life-giving great to be part of it. And Lisa, just to inform you, we are no less demanding at Queen's College than 20 years ago. You finish this presentation, we'll give you a chance to get a breath, and then you go and get ready to preside and to preach in about a half an hour. So,
Fantastic.
Life hasn't changed.
Excellent.
Folks who are online, thank you for your attention, and those who will view this as a recording, I hope you enjoyed as much as we do. For any of you, if you have anything to send along to Lisa, you can do it by email, or you can send it on to me, and I'll forward it on to her. So thank you again, Lisa. Great to have you with us. Always wonderful to have our alumni to visit and to present and to preside and to preach and to do other things. And so great to have you. I invite all of you to join us for liturgy and also for lunch. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Shut down on this. And one thing I should ask is if
And the adoption is true.
stop recording here.